I make it no secret that Zealot is my favourite class to play, and today I want to share with you by far the most OP build available for this class. Now this build is item dependent, so very much make sure to watch until the end, or at least make sure you watch the end so that you know what that weapon is, because that's when I like to build that into my videos. As always, I like to first start by covering the abilities that the class comes with as standard. Starting with Blitz, and this is our stun grenade. This is just an AoE stun, which is fantastic for when you need to pick up allies. Our aura is a 7% damage reduction. This is also for allies that are in coherency as well as ourselves. Our first passive is Swift Exorcism, gives us a 10% boost to melee attack speed. Our iconic is Martyrdom, and we get 5 damage for each 15 health missing, and that has a max stack of 3. And finally, another passive that we have is Until Death, and it's every 90 seconds. Taking damage that would kill us would actually just instead give us invulnerability for 5 seconds and leave us at 1 HP. And then we have our ult, Chastise the Wicked. This is a dash. We can actually dash really far if we lock onto an enemy as well. Replenishes 50% of our total toughness, and the damage of our next melee hit is increased by 25% and is a guaranteed critical hit. And now that's done, we'll jump into the talent tree, starting with the level 5 line here. Purify the Blood is the first choice. This is replenish 50% more toughness on melee kill, so this is like about an extra 5 toughness on melee kill. This is actually pretty strong, especially on the lower difficulties, but as you get up there, you know, you're not always guaranteed to be killing stuff, so sometimes the uptime isn't great. And then after that, we have enemies within, enemies without. Replenish 5% toughness per second while within 5 meters of 3 enemies. Again, there's a bit too much of a conditional attached to that, so the uptime is, inconsistent. We're going for Faith Restored, 75% toughness damage reduction on critical hit for 4 seconds. This makes you very, very, very tanky, and this is kind of the linchpin of this build. So we'll explain why this is so good as we go through the build. And then on the level 10 side of things, we have Retribution to begin, 10% attack speed while below 50, and 20 while below 20%. I honestly don't feel much of a speed boost, and I don't like being on low health, especially with the way that toughness works in the game at the moment. I find that you are just far, far too squishy on the higher difficulties. Punishment, this is actually pretty versatile if you're running some other build, but not for us. But anyways, what this does is increase your impact by 30% for 5 seconds. Impact is basically the ability to knock back enemies, knock them over. I think in the other games you would have called this stagger. And when you have 5 stacks of this after cleaving 3 targets 5 times, you actually get what's called uninterruptible, which means your melee swings will never be interrupted by you being hit. So it's quite good, but for us, the best talent in this line is definitely Bloodletting. 10% melee crit chance for 3 seconds on melee hit against bleeding enemies. Melee critical hits apply a bleed as well. So the more you bleed, the more crits you get and the more you bleed. It's sort of a self-sustaining loop, and this is very pivotal to this build. Level 15, we have Inspiring Excoriation. I think I said that right, might not have. Using Chastise the Wicked replenishes 20% toughness to allies in coherency. This is kind of tough because you can clear a whole bunch of distance with your ult, so this isn't always the most reliable talent to go for. Holy Feather next, 20% power to allies in coherency for 5 seconds on gaining a stack of Martyrdom. Again, this is something that just doesn't have a lot of uptime. Ideally, you're not trying to get hit, so you're not going to be ticking on Martyrdoms very frequently. And if you are playing that red line build, you basically do it right away and stay at low health the whole time. So not very useful. I really can't see many uses for this unless somehow you have a way of making your health go up and down like crazy, but as far as I know, that's not in the game. The clear choice here is Benediction, 15% additional toughness damage reduction to allies in your coherency. This stacks with your aura for a total of 21%. That is big. Moving on to level 20 talents. Now these are actually all really, really close. So if you feel like one works better for you, then by all means, don't feel like you have to lock into my suggestion here. Faith Restores all. After taking damage, recover 25% of it over 5 seconds. It's just a nice way to heal back that chip damage and reduce its effects over the long term. Next is Thy Wrath Be Swift. You no longer get stunned by enemy melee attacks, and when you take damage, gain 20% movement speed for 2 seconds. I love this talent. It feels so good to use. You just zip zap around like a crazy person and your melee attacks never ever get interrupted. Same goes for when you're trying to use your gun. Now I don't know if you guys know this, but if you get hit while you're shooting, it will stop you from shooting. When you're using a clunky gun like the bolter or the flamer, this is a big issue sometimes. So this talent feels super nice to use. However, when you get into those higher difficulties, Holy Revenant I think takes the crown here, because when you proc your passive, which is the 5 seconds of invulnerability you get when you should have otherwise died, you can heal back the damage that you do, and you get double the amount if it's melee. Now personally, I like to try and bait this out by taking damage that would kill me, switching to my bolter and just melting everything in front of me. I can damn near heal to full when I do that. So it is a very good talent, but requires some micromanagement and just some like keen observation of your health bar, because you know, sometimes you might proc it when you're not ready for it and only have one enemy in front of you and get no value from it. So it can be a bit risky. However, when this pays off, boy does it pay off. Moving on to level 25, we have Honor the Martyr, which is martyrdom going up to 6 stacks, which means you have to lose like 90 HP in order to use this. I do not recommend this at all. I don't think the damage increase is particularly good. I also don't think being at 10 HP is particularly good. I don't know how you could ever consider using this on a higher difficulty, as you will just be one shot by absolutely the first thing that you see. The next is Emperor's Executioner. Deal 25% increased range damage based on how close you are to the target. The range damage increase falls off the further away you are. Zealots don't use guns as much as they would like to, I guess, sometimes. Really, we are a melee class. But I guess this, you know, could be nice in some situations where you're primarily using the flamer, for example. That's the only real use case I can use for this. And then the talent we've actually gone for, Rising Conviction. This is just an easy win for me, especially with this build. 4% damage for 5 seconds on hit, stacks 5 times for 20%. We attack fast, right? That's our class. That's what we're all about. This is always at 5. So that's just 20% damage there. Easy done. And then finally, for our final talent, we have Purge the Wicked. And this is actually a very close second. Again, this is one of those talents where I wouldn't blame you for picking this one instead if you feel like it works better for you. But Chastise the Wicked now has 2 charges. Does what it says on the tin. It's a very powerful talent. Fury of the Faithful, 20% attack speed on 5 seconds after using Chastise the Wicked. I honestly just don't think this is anywhere near as strong as the other two. As the primary use that you get out of Chastise the Wicked, personally for me, is the 50% toughness regeneration. The extra, you know, bit of DPS is great, whatever, but at the moment, it's really just a heal and a dash. That's why we're going for Invocation of Death. Melee critical hits reduce the cooldown of Chastise the Wicked by 1.5 seconds, and our build is all about crits. So we're going to be getting that cooldown down really fast. And then, so as I said at the beginning of the video, this is what's really important about this build, and this whole build cannot be executed unless this part is right, and that is your melee weapon. You absolutely must have a combat blade or a combat axe. And the reason being is that these two weapons either have an incredible amount of crit or bleed. And as you remember from our talents, we have the ability to create crit chance from hitting bleeding targets. I personally like the dagger. It has a better moveset in my opinion, as it's able to do a lot of slashing and also armor piercing attacks, whereas the axe kind of leaves you with just armor piercing attacks. But it's a personal preference thing, also kind of depends on what your role in the group is, but for me, I wholly recommend the combat blade. As for the stats, you ideally want to try and roll as high as you can on the damage and mobility. I would say the other ones are not quite as important as those two. However, if you can get something that's nice and well rounded, then obviously, you know, that's perfect. Now, this isn't the best dagger in the world, so don't take this as like the god tier item to go for, but things that you absolutely must have on this one are first of all the lacerate ability, and then ways to increase the damage that the weapon does, because honestly it doesn't do a lot. I've obviously got very good perks here, 20% damage to flak armor targets and 8% to specials. That's great. Ruthless backstab, that's okay, you know, it could be better. But if you're lucky enough to find things that increase your crit chance or just your flat damage in other more reliable ways, then that is what you want to go for. And the exact same goes for the axe. You want to pick up anything that increases your attack speed, crit chance, and anything that just does flat damage. Because remember, this build is built around doing crits with melee attacks. As far as your gun goes, you kind of want to pick either the bolter or the flamer. And I really do believe it's only those two choices. Please don't be angry with me for saying that, but there's a reason for it. I personally go for the bolt gun, and that is because I'm usually in charge of taking out the heavily armored units like the crushers, the maulers, and the bulwarks. And as some of you may be able to see already, my gun has god rolled for that role. You know, extra damage to armored targets, damage to elites, pinning fire for power when I stagger an enemy, and this thing staggers everything. And then I have +3 rending for shattering armored enemies. This thing is god tier. It can be a tiny bit better maybe, but honestly this is about as good as a bolt gun can be. But if you do find that that's not the gun for you, or you need to fulfill the role of horde control within your group, then the flamer is the obvious go-to there. Now this still does pretty good elite damage, but nowhere near as much. It really is just for burning down those huge hordes that you'll get especially a lot of in the higher difficulties. And as far as the stats that you want to get go, I think the damage, cloud radius, and ammo in that order are the ones that you want to focus on. Blessings, overpressure I think is the best. The rest of them are pretty good, so it's kind of just a cherry on the cake situation. I don't have a hard recommendation for that. And perks, like with the bolter, you want to aim for things that increase your damage as a flat rate or help you get those elites dead. Curios are nice and easy. I always say the same thing with these. You want a nice mixture of toughness and health percentage. You can see here that I've got exactly that here. Once I've upgraded this, I'm hoping to get some damage resistance like the legendary one. And then I always recommend that you have at least one bonus wound. I think this one is probably the most important. Make sure you have one wound curio. And then these two you can kind of experiment with. But definitely make sure that you have some health there, and some toughness doesn't hurt either. So then let's summarize this build really quickly. It's a melee build, so you want to be using the dagger almost all of the time, only bringing your gun out when you need to fulfill the role that you've brought the gun for, you know, whether that's killing elites with a bolter or clearing hordes with the flamer. Melee attack uptime is our primary focus here, and that is because, of course, we're going to be getting stacks of Rising Conviction, which we want, 20% damage. We're applying Bleed, which then gives us Bloodletting, which allows us to increase our crit by 30% for every enemy that's bleeding that we hit. And then, you know, for every crit that we have, we're getting a 75% damage reduction on our toughness for 4 seconds, which is super strong. And then, of course, with all of those extra crits, Invocation of Death is going to reduce the cooldown of our ultimate significantly every time that we have to use it, which will be a lot in the higher difficulties. This is by far my absolute favorite build, and the whole reason that I've spent about 100 hours playing Zealot. If you have any questions about the build, please ask away. I'll be more than happy to answer. And oh yeah, don't forget to subscribe and like and all of that good stuff. I really appreciate the support, guys. And until the next one, catch you later.